Today I'm here to wrap up the last of my end of the year content talking about the best science fiction published in 2024. I purposely left this one till last because, as I talked about throughout the year, I've had a really hard time finding enough new releases in science fiction that I personally like based off my taste. I feel like there just is not enough getting published in order to find the books that work for me. However, I'm here with a top 10-ish, heavy on the ish, and you'll find out why. It's a little bit more of a top 9, but we're going to talk about the 10 books I would recommend for science fiction readers. If that sounds good, let's get started. Now, starting at number 10 with The Cheat, you probably know what it's going to be, and that is Polo Stand by Neil Stephenson. This is a historical fiction book that I think has a lot of cross appeal to science fiction readers, hence the author is quite popular in the genre, and I think that he brings a lot of discussion about science and technology and education in those spheres within the lens of his historical fiction story. This follows a young woman who grows up after the Russian Revolution in the country and then ends up moving to the States, and throughout various events ends up getting involved in spy work. I don't want to give away much of the plot because I think that is the fun part to explore. Instead, I will say that this is the kind of book that made me very interested in topics that I otherwise haven't been drawn to. I don't know a lot about Russian history, and it's just not a topic or particular time period or part of the world that I have focused on a lot in my own personal reading, and this is the kind of book that really made me want to change that and made me realize that there is so much fascinating history there that I really have been ignoring or not paying enough attention to, which I think is very prevalent and interesting to see its effects today. So within the story, as I mentioned, it is definitely positioned and classified as historical fiction, but you do still have what I love so much about Neil Stephenson is that he is clearly a very smart and well-educated man, and so he brings his own knowledge into his stories, sharing that with the reader in ways that could be described as info dumps, but for me are just plain enjoyable to read. I love when he shares his expertise. I always learn something, and I very much found that here. This one is most closely compared in my mind to Quicksilver, so if you like that book, I would most recommend it. I don't think it's the best place to start with this author's work because, again, if you're looking for science fiction, it's not really science fiction, but again, I recognize I'm cheating it. It's my list. I'm going to do what I want and recommend this book even though it doesn't quite fit the genre. Like, at all. Then at number 9, we have Tusks of Extinction by Ray Nyler, and this is a story that I had to read twice in order to properly appreciate this year. This is the book that I was hinting about in my previous video on the topic. It follows a future where we have the technology to bring mammoths back to life using their DNA. However, because they are pack animals, they lack the behaviors that are normally taught to them by their mothers and those in their own herd. And so what they do is they take an expert on elephants who has recently died and put her consciousness into the body of one of the mammoths so that she can teach and guide them throughout the way. This is a story that I was very much excited for. I love prehistoric creatures, whether they be dinosaurs or anything in the ice ages like these. And I've watched several documentaries on the topic of potentially bringing back mammoths to life and trying to find their DNA. I find that all completely fascinating, so I was very much the target audience for this one. The first time I read this, I will admit I was a little bit disappointed. I feel like the premise promises more than the book actually delivers. Instead, given the number of pages, it's quite short and it is quite dry in what it's doing, and I would have loved some of these topics to be more explored and fleshed out. I could have easily turned this into a full-length novel and think I would have been a lot more satisfied. However, as I was scrapping around for my end of the year content, I really did wonder if perhaps I had sold this book short and didn't give it the proper attention it deserves, so I reread it again, and I will say that it is a good novel. I think that it is one of the more intelligent science fiction books I've read this year. If you're someone who enjoys more hard science fiction, especially dealing with biology and mammal instinct and all of that, I think that there's some really great topics explored. I wish they were more fleshed out. It did earn a spot on this list, although it is of course number 9. If you enjoyed the author's previous book dealing with the biology and animal instincts of an octopus, I think that this one is a great follow-up. It is very much for a certain type of reader, and again, you have to be someone who's looking more for the ideas rather than great characters or story work. I think that those always come second with this author, but I recognize a lot of you watching this video prefer more classic science fiction, and I think we'll appreciate this one as well. Then at number 8, we have Saturation Point by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a novella that follows a scientist who 20 years ago were part of a project where they went to this rainforest. Terrible things happened and not everyone came back. Now, years later, they are revisiting and returning to that site once again. This is a story that felt very reminiscent of course, the books by Jeff Vandermeer. So if you really enjoyed Annihilation and its sequels, I do think that this one has some great cross appeal. Personally, I found this book to have stronger characters, and I felt that it also fleshed out more of a traditional story. So you have a narrative that is a bit more, again, traditional and less of the weird fiction that Jeff Vandermeer falls into. I just really enjoyed this one. I think Adrian Zukovsky is one who shines in novella length, that he is really good at getting in and out of a story and again packing a punch in a short number of pages in a way that I find very satisfying, where other authors again need more of a novel in order to give me what I'm looking for in terms of those elements. Next, we have Surface Model, also by Adrian Zukovsky. You're going to notice that he highlights heavily in this video here, as he seems to be the only author who is putting out fiction on a regular basis in 2024. I don't know how he writes and publishes so much and so much of quality. This particular story follows a robot who is this domestic AI that works for this man, and within the story you find out right at the beginning, it's all in the setup, that potentially this robot has murdered this man, and you come to watch them as they are escaping, running away, and dealing with the new freedoms that they have found. This is very much described as a book for those of you that love Murderbot, and I do echo that comparison. I think that while it deals with some assumingly heavier topics, it does so in a way that brings in some humor. It very much is the traditional conversation about what it means to be human and be conscious and all of that, and really looking at how we plan and have used robots as places of servants, and really considering some of the larger ramifications of all that. So if you love those kind of topics, if you're never tired of those themes explored, I think that this one is really fun. It is smart, and again, perhaps a touch predictable, but in the hands of someone this skilled, I did not mind it or notice it at all. Instead, I just went along for the ride, really enjoyed it. I think it's smart, and I think a lot of you, if you haven't yet, will really enjoy this one. Then at number 6, we have Lost Ark Dreaming, and this is a short novella that is set in a post-apocalyptic future where the water levels are rising, and so those that are wealthy pay to live in very high skyscrapers, and those that are poor are left to eventually drown in the underbelly of these cities. This story follows individuals who are, of course, fighting against this oppression and imbalance of society, and we follow them through the short adventure. It's again a novella, so it has a short number of pages, but I think the author does a great job of building the world in that short amount of time. It definitely deals with some hot topics in terms of climate change, and it does so in a way that is just dark and gritty and goes there. It doesn't overly explain itself, and instead really lets us see the story through the eyes of the characters and draw our own conclusions as we go along with them, which I find to be one of the most nuanced and smartest ways for me to approach these kind of topics. I really enjoyed this one. I was happy with how dark it went, given my taste for those darker tones, and having something that is again less humorous and more serious is going to always draw me in. So do recommend this one. I don't see enough people talking about it, and I would really love to see more eyes on it, because again, I think a lot of you that share my taste are going to really like this one. Now, breaking into the number 5 spot, we have a book I did not expect to have on this list, and that is To Challenge Heaven by Chris Kennedy and David Weber. These are authors that wrote this together. This is technically the 3rd book in a military science fiction series, and I can barely talk about plot without giving away too much, so know that we follow humans. They are in this conflict, and within the story, within this book particularly, it explores some other elements that lean into horror, and so this book was such a great surprise for me because I was not aware of those elements. And again, I think that it's best going in without knowing too much about it, because I just really enjoyed the elements pulled out of this story. Keep in mind that I'm actually not someone who normally loves military science fiction. I don't think it's something that really appeals to me based off my taste, but there certainly are exceptions, this one included, that do it so well and make me actually care about the positioning of the ships and who is where and how they're holding down certain points in order to secure areas. And it basically is so well done that it makes me care about things that I otherwise wouldn't about based off my personal taste. So if you enjoy that genre even more than I do, you'll probably enjoy those elements quite a bit more, or at least as much as I did. Again, it is a series, so you do technically want to start back at the beginning, but I actually read this book first and then read the first 2 books after, which I recognize is a wild thing that a reader should not do. But I'll be honest, this one almost works as a standalone because you were thrown to the action, and I personally enjoyed just figuring out as I went along. I did honestly find the first 2 books a lot weaker, and had I read those ones, I probably wouldn't have continued on with the series to read this one, which would have been a horrible mistake since obviously it's a favorite of the year. So keep that all in mind. You could probably throw yourself into this one as long as you're okay with having no backstory and just having to figure it out and piece it together as you go along. I find that quite fun. Some readers may not. Your mileage may vary. This one's a little bit of a wild card, but if I'm honest, based off enjoyment alone, this book had to be my top 5. Then at number 4, we have Jump Knots, and this is a piece of of science fiction set in a future where humanity or Earth is broken into two major factions that are quite distinct and different and fighting between each other. And then the beginning of the story, and this is in the synopsis, so it's not technically a spoiler, I do need to mention that there is a potential alien presence that emerges, and of course that shakes up the balance between the powers. And it's kind of the question of, do you come together because there is this other force, or do you let your divisions divide you further? And this is a story that I feel like is not getting enough attention online. It came out earlier this year and I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it, although I do admit I don't catch up entirely on every review video on YouTube. This is one that slightly reminded me of The Three-Body Problem and its sequels. I do need to be cautious giving that recommendation given what a beloved series that is, but if you love science fiction from a Chinese perspective and particularly dealing with some of the similar themes and topics that are explored in that one, I think that you will possibly scratch the same itch with this one, or at least I did. Keep in mind this one is quite slow. It is much more about the ideas. I did find the characters honestly to be quite flat, so if you're someone again who needs characters that are well-rounded, people that you like and care for and empathize with, you won't necessarily get that here. Instead, this one felt much more like a thought experiment, one that I really enjoyed, so I enjoyed the story overall, but it definitely has a slow start. It's not one that hooks you in with a big narrative twist, and instead you just follow the story as it plays out and watch where it goes. So I recommend this one. Again, a bit of a sleeper of the year in terms of my reading experience, but I think that a lot of you will enjoy it and I hope you try it out. And we're breaking into the number 3, which are easily the 3 strongest books of the year by a long shot. So if you're only going to read a couple things off this list, I encourage you to pay attention from here on out. The first book I want to talk about is Alien Clay by, yes, Adrian Tchaikovsky. I do realize he showed up 3 times in this video, but again, I think that given the amount of quality content he put out, I do not apologize for that. There's a reason that he is so beloved, and I've really come to appreciate him more than ever this year and just appreciate someone who's writing fantastic new modern fiction. Anyway, this particular story follows a professor. On this planet, they discover there is the remains of an alien society, and with that, of course, comes the potential of technology and also changing humanity's worldview. This is a story that I think is best to go in honestly blind from there. I don't need to give away more of what happens because it's so much fun to explore that for yourself. This is a story that really hit home to me. I previously talked about how it really filled the void that I was left with after reading Mercy of the Gods and finding that one to be quite weak for my taste. Instead, this one really did the great balance of having great character work, a great mystery to it, having great world building and ideas, and kind of ticking all the boxes in just the right way that didn't feel at all contrived, but instead really an author who clearly loves science fiction and wants to share his ideas and thoughts, and clearly is not running out of creative pursuits when it comes to his writing. So highly recommend this one. Of the 3 Adrian Tchaikovsky books I'm talking about on this list, obviously this is the one I'm ranking the highest. So if you're only going to pick up one, this would be my recommendation. It is fantastic, and I really do think it has some wide appeal because, again, while it deals with science fiction ideas, it also has some of his best character work I've seen from him, which really got me excited. So if you're at all interested in science fiction, I think that this one appeals to a really wide audience, and I would love to see people trying it out. It's a great place to start by him. Then at number 2, we have Disquiet Gods by Christopher Ruocchio. This is the 6th book in the Sun Eater series. There's one more book to go. I have done a separate review talking about that, so I will link the video down below if I remember. But essentially, this is a story that follows a man who becomes known as the Sun Eater. We follow him through his journey as he recounts his past and how he got to the point that he does. I cannot talk at all about the plot points at this point of this book, but just know that I was someone who was actually quite lukewarm on the series when it started. I've done also a series review, so I will talk about the fact that I don't actually adore the first book. I do see some of the flaws with it, and it's a series that actually, for me, got better with each book and went from something that I liked or somewhat appreciated to a series that I'm quite invested in. I'm very much excited and looking forward to the last book. So if you love the series from book 1, I don't think you'll be disappointed. I thought that there were some great reveals, some great character development, twists and turns, action-packed, and for me, despite the length, this one was just an easy one to fly through because it moved so quickly. I do think the author's writing has improved quite a bit from their earlier work, which again, people have always said he's a good writer. And if that's the case, I think he's just gotten better from there. So highly recommend this one. But again, go back all the way to the beginning and you got to catch up to all the chunky books in between. So I love this book. If you haven't caught up in the series yet, I do hope you change that. Easily one of the best books of the year, and I'm hoping that the final book will be a favorite of next year. I think it comes out next year. Fact check me. me. And finally, at the #1 spot, we have Womb City, and this is a story that I love so much. I did an individual dedicated review for it that I'll have linked down below. This is a story that is a piece of somewhat dystopian fiction that blends together science fiction ideas also with horror elements. I'm choosing to put it in this video, but it certainly could be a cross-genre book for a lot of people. In this one, we follow a woman who is with her partner. At the beginning of the story, they are trying to deal with conceiving a child, and so you deal with a lot of infertility issues that for me really hit close to home. It's set in a society where women typically will conceive, and rather than carrying the child in their belly, they are kept in these artificial wombs. So it very much plays with the idea of having an artificial surrogate. So for me, I felt very emotional with the story because it starts out dealing very heavily with a woman's worth being tied to her ability to naturally conceive children, and that just hit home for me on so many personal levels. But beyond that, even if you don't care about those elements, keep watching, because within the story, again, it is set in this dystopian future where people, particularly women, are very much controlled by the society. Particularly, you have a loss of bodily control. You have the ability for those that are rich enough to be able to move their consciousness from one body to another, and they typically are taking the bodies of those that have recently died. You have a lot of people who are being killed through the prison system in order to get the supply of bodies to keep coming. This book has some really horrific implications. It definitely deals with elements of body horror within it. And again, very much the state of a government that is controlling and watching everyone's movement. The story starts out much more intellectual and kind of dealing with these big ideas, and then it moves into more of an action-driven plot with a fast narrative. Some people love the first half, some people love the second. Personally, I love them both, and it's definitely one of my favorite books of the year. I've already reread it, and again, I don't do a lot of individual reviews these days. I want to change that, but the fact is that after finishing this book, I had to gush about it. I had to get more people reading it. It has a relatively low rating on Goodreads, and I'm trying to change that one person at a time because I don't know if people are expecting something different than what they're getting, but I love this one and I think a lot of you will too. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I'd also love to hear what are some of your favorite science fiction books published in 2024. If I haven't read them yet, I will try to do so soon, and if I have read them and they're not a favorite, please don't take it personally. Everyone has their own individual reading taste, and I'm happy that you enjoyed them. Hopefully you stick around and subscribe if you enjoyed this. You can also help me out with this video. Give me a thumbs up, dropping a comment, even if it's just an emoji, and hitting that notification bell. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed my end of the year content. Definitely check the playlist in case you missed any videos, and I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.